Good morning and thank you for joining our webinar. Today we are going to talk about programming fundamentals, specifically constructing loops. My name is Van Jacob Giro Basura and I am the host of this webinar. I am currently a fourth year computer science student of Lyceum of the Philippines University, Cavite campus. I finished my internship at Betaphone Corporation as an IT support personnel. I have MTA 98-366 Networking Fundamentals and MTA 98-375 HTML5 Application Development Fundamentals certifications. Today I am joined by two speakers, John Marcacho and Aaron James Cernat. John Mark is a fourth year computer science student at Lyceum of the Philippines University, Cavite campus. He finished his internship at the Department of Education as an IT support personnel. He has MTA 98-366 Networking Fundamental Certification. Aaron is a fourth-year computer science student at Lyceum of the Philippines University, Cavite campus. He finished his internship at Denso 10 Solutions Philippines Corporation as a QA tester. He also developed a educational website for seafarers using PHP, and he also developed a room scheduling desktop application that uses an optimized search algorithm through the combination of linear and index search algorithm. Now we are going to talk about our agenda for today. Today we will have an intro to basic programming constructing loops. We will tackle for loop, while loop, do while loop, and recursion. Now, recursion is not really considered an iteration or a loop, but they have similar behavior, so we decided to make it part of the webinar. After the concepts, we will head on straight to applying these loops on a program. Expected outcomes. At the end of this seminar, you are expected to be able to correctly use all of the loops introduced, successfully distinguish the difference between the loops and also the difference between an iteration and a recursion. And also, you are expected to understand how a program flows with a loop. Now, let's head on to the conceptual part of the webinar, and that is by Mr. John Mark Cacho.
Hello, this is John Marcacho. I'm here to talk about constructing loops theory. Looping in programming languages is a feature which facilitates the execution of a set of instructions or functions repeatedly while some condition evaluates to true. Typically, a certain process is done such as getting an item of data, changing it, then some of condition is checked such as whether a counter has reached a prescribed number. If it hasn't, the next instruction in the sequence is an instruction to the return to the first instruction in the sequence and repeat the sequence. If the condition has reached, the next instruction falls through the next sequential instruction or branches outside the loop. A loop is a fundamental programming idea that is commonly used in writing programs. Looping also has its disadvantages, and these are infinite loops and out-of-memory loops. Infinite loops, it is a common mistake one could make while implementing a loop. It is that the loop might not set its condition to false, making it the code loop forever until it's manually stopped. The result is that the loop repeats continually until the operating system sends it and terminates the program, while an error or until some other event occurs, such as having the program automatically terminate after a certain duration of time. Out-of-memory errors, or running a long loop might get you a numerous out-of-memory errors. Now we are going to talk about type of loops. There are three common loops there are while loops, for loops, do while loops. While loop is a control flow system that allows the code to be executed repeatedly based on a given Boolean condition. The while loop can be thought of as a repeating if statement. While loop flows like this. While loop starts with the checking of condition. If it evaluated to true, then the loop body statements are executed. Otherwise, the first statement following the loop is executed. For this reason, it is also called a entry control loop. Once the condition is evaluated to true, the statements in the loop body are executed. Normally, the statements contain an update value for the variable being processed for the next iteration. Next condition becomes false. The loop terminates, which marks the end of the life cycle. Now, for for loops, provide a concise way of writing the for loop structure. Unlike the while loop, a for statement consumes the initialization condition and increment or decrement in one, thereby providing a shorter, easy to debug structure of looping. For loop, it flows like this. Initialization condition. Here, we initialize the variable in use. It marks the start of a for loop. An already declared variable can be used, or a variable that can be declared are local to loop only. Testing condition. It is used for testing the exit condition for a loop. It must be returned a Boolean value. It is also an exit control loop as a condition check prior to the execution of the loop statements. Statement execution. Once the condition is evaluated to true, the statements in the loop are executed. Increment or decrement, it is used for updating the variable for the next iteration. Loop termination, when condition becomes false, the loop terminates, marking it the end of its life cycle. Now, for the do-while loops, do-while loops are similar to while loop, with only difference that it checks the condition after executing the statements, and therefore, it is an example of exit control loop. Do-while loops are executed at least once. It is set while loops and do-while loops apart. Do-while loops execute like this. Do-while loop starts with the execution of the statements. There is no checking of that any condition for the first time. After executing the statements and update the variable, the condition is checked for true or false value. If it evaluated to true, the next iteration loop starts. When the condition becomes false, the loop terminates, which marks the end of its life cycle. It is important to note that the do-while loop will execute its statements at least once before any condition is checked, and therefore it's an example of an exit control loop. Now, since we know the loops now, how do we find out which in our program, which loop to use in our program? You will use while loop if the loop must be repeated until a certain condition is met. If the condition is false at the beginning of the loop will never be executed. The condition may be determined by the user at the keyboard. The condition may be numeric or an alphanumeric entry. This is a good, solid looping process with an application to a numerous situation. And then, we will use do-while loop if the loop should execute the body of the loop at least one time. Do-while loop is an exit condition loop. The condition is checked at the end of the loop. This process is good choice when asking a question whose answer will determine if the loop is repeated. While loops for while for loops are used if the loop is repeated a specific number of times determined by the program or the user. The loop counts the number of times and the body will be executed. This loop is a good choice when the number's repetition is known can be supplied by the user. Now, we will go for Aaron for the application of these loops. Thank you.
Hello, this is Aaron, and now I'm going to demonstrate different types of loops. So first, let's create a project called looping. Then let's create a string array of numbers in their string format in words. So 1, 2, So if we were to print all of the contents of the numbers array, we would have to do it like this. From index 0 up to index 9, because arrays are 0 based. So as you can see, just printing all of the contents of numbers array would be taxing. That's why we have loops. So if we were to print it using a loop, it would just be like I is less than equal to less than numbers that length equals. So in this line of codes, this is a sample of for loop. So I is the counter variable. Second statement would be the condition check. So if this is true, then it will execute the incrementer or decrementer. So basically, what this lines of code does is loop through this array from 0 up to its length, which is 10. But as you can see at the condition, while I is less than numbers dot length. So the length of numbers is 10. So when I hits 9, the loop should stop. So the output of this would be like this. So as you can see, compared to the code before that has 10 lines just to print all of the contents of numbers array, it would be just like this using a loop statement. So here I have created an array called numbers, which is filled with numbers from 1 to 10. Then I created a console object that will be used to get the input from the user through the console. So there are three kinds of loop: while, for loop, and do while loop. So let's talk about while loop. A while loop is a control flow statement that allows code to be executed repeatedly based on a given Boolean condition. The while loop can be thought of as a repeating if statement. While loop starts with the checking of condition. If it evaluated to true, then the loop body statements are executed. Otherwise, first statement following the loop is executed. For this reason, it is also called entry control loop. Once the condition is evaluated to true, the statements in the loop body are executed. Normally, the statements contain an update value for the variable being processed for the next iteration. When the condition becomes false, the loop terminates, which marks the end of its life cycle. So let's try to create a simple program that will search for a word in numbers array entered by the user using a while loop. So first, let's create a string variable input, which would hold the input from the user. Then let's create a boolean found and set it to false by default, which would hold the boolean value that if input by the user is found in this list. So now let's create a while loop. While, then condition here, then inside the brackets is the statements to be executed through the loop. So our first condition, I'm sorry, I forgot to create a counter which would iterate through the indices of numbers array. Set is as 0 because arrays are 0 based. So if counter is less than numbers that length, so while the counter is less than numbers that length, statements inside these brackets will continue to execute. So the reason why it's less than numbers that length, because the last index of numbers array is 9, and the value that is being returned by numbers array is 10. So since arrays are zero base, it must be length minus 1. So counter is less than numbers that length. So first, let's create an if statement. If I forgot again, let's prompt the user to enter a string to find in the array. So enter a word to search. Input is equals to answer. So if input is equals numbers counter, so let's check if the input of the user is equal to any of the values in this array. So if it is equal, let's say found is equals to true, because the value is found in the number array, and stop break the loop, because there would be no more sense to continue iterating through the array once the value has been found. Else, let's increment the counter. Then set found as false. Then after the while loop, let's create a simple if statement. If found, that simply means that if found is equals to true. So if found, let's just simply say found. Then if not found, let's say not found. So let's try this simple program. I'm sorry, I forgot to build the project first. So build the project first. Then run the program. So enter word to search. Let's say 8. So the program then says that it's found. So now let's go to for loop. So I'll just delete this. Now let's create a for loop. I guess this is the only thing that we'll delete. So let's talk about for loops. For loops provide a concise way of writing the loop structure. Unlike a while loop, a for statement consumes the initialization, condition, and increment or decrement in one line, thereby providing a shorter, easy to debug structure of looping. Here, we initialize the variable in use. It marks the start of a for loop. An already declared variable can be used, or a variable can be declared local to loop only. Testing condition. It is used for testing the exit condition for a loop. It must return a Boolean value. It is also an entry control loop, as the condition is checked prior to the execution of the loop statements. Then statement execution. Once the condition is evaluated to true, the statements in the loop body are executed. Increment or decrement. It is used for updating the variable for the next iteration. Loop termination. When the condition becomes false, the loop terminates, marking the end of its life cycle. So here's how a for loop looks like. For, then declare a counter variable, initialization of the counter. So let's set it as 0 because arrays begins at 0. Then the condition, same as the while loop, while I is less than numbers that length. Then if it is true, let's increment the counter. So as you can see, it is more simpler, more easy to ice, and easier to maintain, as initialization, condition, and increment or decrement is done in one line compared to the while loop before. They're they're at separate places, so it's much easier and more readable if we use for loop compared to while loop. So we don't need that counter variable anymore. So after the user inputs a word to search, let's search that word from the numbers array using a for loop. So if input that equals numbers I, so I, which is 0 from here, then while the condition is true, it will increment. So if I is equals to numbers to any of the indices in this list, so let's say that found is equals to true, then break the array. Break will just terminate the array, else found is equals to false. Then create a simple if statement. If found, system.out.println found, else not found. So let's test this program. So let's look for 6. Let's try to look for 6. So it says found. Let's try to search for 11, which is not in the list. Then it says not found. So that's the for loop. So let's now do the do while loop. So do while loop is a kind of loop where a block of statements will be executed first, then a condition check at the end that will decide whether the statement should execute or not. One ideal use of this loop is when you want to create a program that asks whether the user wants to repeat a task again or not. So now for this, let's create a program that will ask the user again to search for a word from numbers array, but at the end of that search, we will ask the user again if he or she wants to search to create a search, to perform a search again. So do while condition. So same format as the previous ones. Statements inside the bracket array are the ones that will be executed while the condition is met. So after, let's put this inside the do while loop because we would want to repeat these statements if ever that the user wants to perform a search again. So let's create another variable called answer that will hold if the user wants to perform a search again or not. So here I created a simple method that accepts that takes two parameters. First is the string array and the word to find. So it just uses the while loop for finding the value in the array. So we're gonna use that. It returns a boolean. So if the word to find is in the string array, it returns true, else it returns false. So let's just say if find, let's just rename this to found so it would fit more here in this statement. If found numbers, the string array, and the input of the user, where to find, let's just print found. Then if not, let's just say not found. Then at the end, let's ask the user if do you want to perform a search again. Then store the user's answer in this variable console.next line. So let's say y or n. So let's just convert this to uppercase for simpler comparison. So the condition would then be while answer that equals y. So while the user still answers yes, which is y, this block of code will continue to execute again and again until the user enters n or other characters. So let's test this simple program. Then run. So enter a word to search. Let's try 9. So found. Do you want to perform a search again? Let's say yes. Then enter a word to search. Let's say 13, which is obviously not in the numbers array. Then it would say not found. And to perform search again, let's say no. Then the program finishes executing.
Now we're gonna talk about recursion. Okay, so recursions are different from loops. Right, loops are iterative functions. Loop to repeat a part of a code, when a recursive function calls itself to repeat the code. Now, what does that mean? Basically, if you look at a recursive function, you're gonna see that inside its code segment, it calls itself. While in a loop, as you guys saw earlier, that does not really happen. That you don't call yourself because you use loops. But in a recursive function, that is what happens. Now we're gonna look at the advantage of using a loop or an iterative function and the advantage of using a recursive function. Okay, main points. Iterative algorithms are fast but they are hard to write, while recursive algorithms are slower than iterative algorithms performance-wise, but they're easier to write. I have here like two codes, and it's like that. There's one on the left side and there's one on the right side. The one on the left side is a recursive algorithm, while the one on the right side is a iterative algorithm. You can clearly see now that the left one is shorter than the one on the right side, because outside don't need to use a lot of variables. Like it's easier to understand, right? But the one on the right side, it's kind of confusing if you look at it, because first there's the if, then there's the else. Inside the else, there's the this variable declaration, then there's the for loop. Now these two things perform like the same thing. Okay, they function the same. The one on the right side would perform faster than the one on the left side. So that's kind of the thing. And the one on the left side, it's shorter, but it's slower. And then the one on the right side, it's harder to understand, it's harder to write, but it's faster performance-wise. Okay, guys, so that is the seminar. Okay, I would like to thank the two speakers I had today, Mr. John Marcacho and Mr. Aaron James Turner, for being part of this webinar. Thank you for everyone for watching. Okay, bye.